conference. Do you want to put your agendas down for some really inspiring speech? And we're really proud. We're really proud to invite, I think, probably our first ever elected MP, who's a Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union member. And I think we've already seen how when he was invited to take the oath, I'm sure you're probably going to speak about it yourself, aren't you? But I think we've already seen that he comes from a great trade union, and he'll represent our interests. And we're really proud and privileged and honoured to have you here as our first ever elected Labour MP. Please address our conference. Welcome, Richard Burgon.
Friends, comrades, fellow members of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, it's great to be here today. There isn't a union conference better than the BFAWU conference. It's the most democratic conference, it's the most down-to-earth conference, and certainly it's one of the most political conferences as well. Just to introduce myself, as Ian said, my name's Richard Burgon. I'm the newly elected Labour MP for my home constituency of Leeds East. Thank you. Leeds. I'm looking out, I'm seeing some people with football tops on, which is good, but I can't see a Leeds United top out there anywhere. Is it? Nowhere. I'd wear one. It's a sad state of affairs, but I'm pleased to be here because I've had a long working relationship with the union. For 10 years, I was a trade union lawyer, and I worked very closely with your union. With our union, and two of the highlights of my working month was always when I went to see Ian Wood, I don't know if he's here, at the Pudsey office of the union, and when I had my rare trips to Fox's Biscuits at Batley, sometimes at night time, to see Helena England and the team there. I used to really enjoy that, and the reason I'm wearing an all-black outfit today isn't like Johnny Cash, when Johnny Cash says the reason I wear black is to remind me of all the misery in the world that we need to change. The reason I wear black clothes is to try and look a bit slimmer after all those free biscuits I got from Fox's Biscuits and elsewhere. But I was really interested to hear the debate that you've just had about the Labour Party. No party is perfect, and the Labour Party certainly isn't perfect either. But I think that we've got to ask ourselves some questions. I think there are too many people in the trade union movement over the years who have blamed others for the rise of New Labour 20 years ago in the mid-90s. The blunt truth is, and we've got to be self-critical, is that by and large the trade unions assisted in the birth of New Labour and went along with it, with honourable exceptions such as the Bakers Union. And the reality is, in the past few years, unions have got organised, they've rejected that model, and unions have taken part more and more effectively, working with other unions in parliamentary selections to decide who the Labour candidate is. So I don't think that the way forward is moaning on the sidelines. I know plenty of good comrades who have resigned from the Labour Party over the last 20 years, over various policy decisions, over various understandable worries about the direction of the party. And sometimes they write long, articulate, passionate, principled socialist letters to the leader of the Labour Party or the General Secretary of the Labour Party saying, this is why I've resigned. And what I say to them when they do that, do you think that makes Blairites sad to receive a letter from a socialist saying you resigned? No, it makes them happy, and they're also laughing at you for wasting your time writing a long letter that just makes them laugh. That's the truth. The Labour Party was obviously set up by the trade unions. It's our party, and so if you don't like the direction of the Labour Party, and I have my concerns just as you do, to leave the Labour Party because of that is the equivalent of leaving your trade union because you don't like the direction of the trade union at any given time. It would seem ludicrous to other people to say, well, I don't like what our branch is doing at the moment, so what we should do, because we don't like what our trade union branch is doing at the moment, let's set up our own branch, let's set up our own new union. because we have the power to change the Labour Party. We have the power together, if we get stuck in, not to make it perfect, because no political party is perfect, but to make it what it should be, which is a tool to be used and a weapon to be used in favour of the interests of working people. So why are trade unions so important to the Labour Party? I'd say trade unions are important to the Labour Party, not like some of my colleagues might think, because they give money to the Labour Party. I think that the real reason that trade unions are important to the Labour Party is not even because of nostalgic reasons or historical reasons, the fact that, as I mentioned, the Labour Party was set up by the trade unions. The real importance of the trade unions to the Labour Party and to all of us is that the trade unions allow a window into the real world of millions of people across our country, a real world that is sadly not represented enough in the Parliamentary Labour Party today. But there are pieces of good news. There are always pieces of good news in terms of the way the trade unions are delivering within the Labour Party. There have been more left-wing Labour MPs selected and elected at this general election, both in 2010 and 2015, because the trade unions had got our acts together organisationally. We've selected the kind of candidates that you want to see, the kind of candidates that will listen to you and the kind of candidates that will work with you. But there's a long, long way to go, and I make no bones about that. So, on election night, the 7th of May, I was happy for about 4 minutes. Those 4 minutes were from 10 o'clock till 4 minutes past 10. On my way down to Leeds Arena to attend the election count, we were thinking that Labour would be the biggest party in the new Parliament. And at 4 minutes past 10, the exit polls came in, and they were sobering. For those of us that needed sobering up, they were sobering reading those election exit polls. So why did we lose the general election, though? I think the fundamental reason that the Labour Party lost the general election is because after the 2010 general election, we failed to nail the myth that somehow spending money on schools and hospitals and public services somehow caused a global economic crisis. The banking crisis was caused by the bankers, the clues in the name, but the Labour Party somehow managed this lie to take hold in the minds of people across our country, assisted by the big business-backed right-wing media, likening the country's economy to the economy of a house. The economy of a country is nothing like the economy of a house. Last time I looked, a house and a family couldn't print money, and if they did, they'd be in trouble with the police. A government can print money, and that's totally different. So there's a lot of myths that we needed to scotch, and we failed to do so. So what is the myth that we need to nail now? I know it's a myth that no one in this room will believe, but some people out there unfortunately believe it. The myth that Labour needs to nail now, or we will lose the next general election as well, is the myth that somehow we lost the last general election because we were too left-wing. That's what the newspapers are saying, that's what certain people in the Labour Party are saying, and it's total absolute nonsense. There's nothing left-wing, particularly, about wanting to abolish exploitative zero-hours contracts. It's the right thing to do, and it's common sense. There's nothing left-wing about wanting to save our NHS from privatisation. It's common sense and it's the right thing to do. There's nothing left-wing about introducing a mansion tax to put £2.5 billion extra into our NHS, and it's the right thing to do to abolish employment tribunal fees. And all of those things would have happened if a Labour government, imperfect as it would have been, had been elected the other week. In my constituency of East Leeds, where unemployment is higher than most parts in the country. It's one of the constituencies with the highest rates of unemployment in the country. If Labour had been elected, no one in East Leeds would have been paying the bedroom tax. So Labour wasn't perfect, but the fact is, on a bread and butter basis, life would have been better for people in the workplaces we represent and people in the communities that we represent and seek to represent. But as I say, Labour wasn't perfect, and the job would have been to get a Labour government elected with these policies, and then through your union, through community groups, through anti-cuts groups, put more pressure on a Labour government to deliver more for working people. What we can't do is hand things over for leaders to deliver to us. It's absolute nonsense. It's not like going to the supermarket and buying a product. What it's about is a relationship between the movement and the leader, Don't leave it to leaders to deliver for us, because that very rarely ever works. You know, we wanted a Labour government, and then we wanted to put more pressure on that Labour government to do more, and more pressure on that Labour government to turn away from an austerity-light agenda. The fact is, though, that the last Labour manifesto had policies that wouldn't have been dreamt of, but should have been the kind of policies that would have been in previous manifestos. Without trade union involvement, without the involvement of your union, there wouldn't have been that policy to abolish exploitative zero-hours contracts. There wouldn't have been the policy to abolish employment tribunal fees. And there wouldn't have been those kind of policies which would have made lives better for a lot of us. But when I'm following the leadership debate in the newspapers and elsewhere, I say this, and I know I'm saying this, I'm preaching to the converted here, but we mustn't heed the call of those in the Labour Party or in the media or anywhere else who want us to travel back in time to the mid-1990s, to the stale, failed Blairite past. It's a fact that Labour would have won the general election in 1997 had John Smith lived. It's a fact that Labour's victories would have been sustainable, and we wouldn't be suffering the damage we're suffering now if John Smith had been leader and if Tony Blair had never been leader of the Labour Party. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm much more comfortable with Rupert Murdoch's newspapers and Rupert Murdoch attacking the Labour leader, like they did with Ed Miliband, than I am with the Labour leader ending up as godfather to Rupert Murdoch's child, as was the case with Tony Blair. So what has happened since 2010, and what's going to happen next? Make no mistake, the government talks about deficit reduction, but deficit reduction isn't what this government's economic policy is about. This government's economic policy is about using the economic crisis, a crisis of the neoliberal capitalist system, as a smokescreen to roll back the gains working class people, through our trade unions, through our Labour Party, through our own collective efforts, have made since World War II. Because it's a fact that the most class-conscious political party in the mainstream, without a shadow of a doubt, is the Conservative Party, the party that never sells out the class that it was formed and exists to represent. Selling out the class is the job of other mainstream political parties, isn't it, sometimes? But that's down to us to stop that happening. So the trade union movement and working class people across our country are now looking down the barrel of a gun. The barrel of a gun of cuts even more savage than the cuts we've seen in the last 5 years. The barrel of a gun that's about attacking the trade union's ability to defend and advance terms and conditions, because what they're about is finishing the job of privatising our NHS, finishing the job of turning our NHS into an American-style healthcare system where they feel for your wallet before they feel for your pulse. What they're about is finishing Thatcher's attacks on the trade unions so that the trade unions don't have the power to stand up legally to the attacks that are coming our way in terms of terms, conditions, jobs and our public services. That's what they're about. They're incredibly class-conscious. They're even about reducing the number of MPs, and what that's about, of course, is quite simple. They want to reduce the number of Labour MPs, and they want to build in a permanent Conservative majority. So, democracy, as it's called, democracy and the universal franchise, every person having a vote, was obviously something that we fought hard for. Lots of young people today don't know that it wasn't always the case that women had the right to vote. Lots of young people now don't know that ordinary working class men and women didn't always have the right to vote. And democracy, everyone having the right to vote, poses a problem for those at the top. The problem being, if everyone has a vote, the 99% might use that vote in the interests of the 99% and against the interests of the super-privileged 1%. So they have to find, the elites have to find, a solution to the problem of democracy. Nye Bevan, a great hero, a lad who left school at the age of 15, a lad who worked in the coal mines, who became a trade unionist, became a trade union rep, who later became a Labour MP, who later became a Labour cabinet minister and played the most significant role in setting up our NHS, said that democracy is a sword pointed at the heart of property power. So the ruling elites have found ways to blunt that sword, where in fact we should be using that sword to drive it into the heart of the establishment and drive it into the heart of those ideologies that stand in the way of everyone having the life that they deserve. And one of the ways they've found around the problem of democracy is apathy. That's true. The newspapers make people apathetic. The newspapers make working class people think, oh, it's not worthwhile voting. You can bet your bottom dollar that those in whose interest it is to get a Conservative government time after time always vote and never become disillusioned. So one of the solutions they found to the problem, their problem, of everyone having a vote is to make sure that less and less people are convinced that it's worthwhile voting, and it's only them that gain by that. I've heard a lot of talk in the Labour leadership debate about this word aspiration. And one Labour leadership candidate said, oh, we did well in the election, but we didn't reach out to aspirational communities. And I found that an offensive insult to my community, because we did do well in my community. We increased our majority and we got a good vote. So the implicit suggestion there is that places like East Leeds and places like the places that we all live in somehow aren't aspirational. Well, I totally reject a politics that is based around the idea that aspiration is the aspiration of one person from a council estate in East Leeds to become a millionaire when everyone else is left in the situation that they were born in. That's not the kind of individualist aspiration I want to see at the core of our politics. The kind of aspiration that we should be talking about is collective aspiration. The kind of aspiration we should be talking about is not the aspiration of 1 in 100,000 people to become super rich from an ordinary background. The aspirations we should be talking about are quite simple. The aspiration to be able to send your kid to university without saddling them with loads of debt. The aspiration for everyone to have the right to a decent, stable employment with a job that's a living wage with a minimum wage of £10 an hour. The aspiration of decent, real apprenticeships with good jobs at the end of them, and the aspiration for well-funded public services, democratically controlled in public hands. Now, if these are aspirations that are wild, that are fanciful, that are utopian, then I think we all better give up. But they're not. These are the aspirations that people out there look to our movement to help them deliver, and we shouldn't hold back in trying to deliver those. There's been much talk about left and right. Yes, I'm on the left, I'm proud to be so. Yes, I'm a socialist, I'm proud to be so. But most people out there, and you'll know this from talking to your reps, don't think of themselves as left or right. They don't even know what these phrases mean. But things have changed, and in some ways, things have changed for the better, because unlike in decades past, if you ask people, should the railways be in public ownership, then 73% of people say yes, that's a left-wing policy, whether they realise it or not. If you ask people, should bankers be taking home all the money they do without paying the fair share of tax, then most people, even Conservative voters, believe it or not, say no, it's not right, that shouldn't be happening. So for left-wing policies, such as supporting everyone being paid a living wage, there is support out there. But I think the point of a political party isn't just to reflect people's opinions as they are now, because if that were the case, there wouldn't be a need for political parties. The point of a political party is also to shape the political consensus. That's what it's about. So Labour does need to be bold. Labour does need to take a lead with things. But your role is very important in that. Give your MPs a hard time. Give your Labour MPs a hard time. If they're not standing up for the policies that you think they should, go and see them at the constituency surgeries, write to them, lobby them, and give them a hard time. Take part in the political process, because politics is too important just to be left to politicians. So we're facing down the barrel of a gun over the next 5 years. Neoliberalism, man once said that neoliberal economics can be the entire world into private property, is coming our way with more force than it has done for many a year. We need to blow out the water the neoliberal economic consensus, the free market economic consensus that's existed in this country since 1979. We need to defeat that, because the free market, leaving things to the market, won't lead to better lives for the people we represent or for your members. So we're in a very difficult situation. The defeat was hard on May the 7th, and the defeat's hard for all of those who are going to suffer the consequences of that election defeat. People will be still paying the bedroom tax. People will see the services cut. I believe that the cuts that are coming the way of local councils demand an approach from Labour councils, that the Labour council should be working together to find an effective way to resist those cuts, because we can't pretend that services aren't going to be damaged. For example, the council in my area, Leeds City Council, has suffered cuts of nearly 50% in its funding, and there's more cuts to come. The approach needs to be political, the resistance needs to be political, because if not, there's no point in being a council, and there's no point in being a councillor. That's the truth of things. So in some ways, we're on the defensive now. The attacks are coming our way. But I think, and I know that Ian and Ronnie think, that we need to attack them as well. I'm looking forward to being on the anti-austerity march, the People's Assembly Against Austerity March on the 20th of June, and I hope to see as many of you there as possible. We need to fight back, we need to resist, and we need to attack. When I sit on the House of Commons benches and look across at the Conservatives, I don't find it a titillating, amusing game like some people do. I'm looking across at people I despise, and I make no apology for that. And the reason I despise them is this: wouldn't you despise people, and don't you despise people who are sticking the boot into your friends, family, neighbours and work colleagues? Because that's what they're doing. But the battles that we have to fight won't be won in the chamber of the House of Commons alone. The battles that we have to fight will be won in the workplace and on the streets. And we all know, don't we? We all know who the second most popular party in working class areas by and large now is. In areas across the country, in many areas across the country, the second most popular political party, unfortunately, is UKIP. And this is an argument that you're in a really good position to win with your work colleagues and your neighbours. People think that UKIP are an anti-establishment party. It couldn't be further from the truth. Nigel Farage couldn't be any more establishment if he tried. A public school educated banker who was a member of the Conservative Party and harboured dreams of becoming a Conservative MP. But when it didn't work out, he decided to get involved with something else instead. For all their talk of the People's Army and this and that, what they stand for is the same Thatcherite, free market, neoliberal economics that the Conservative Party stands for. So we need to make that clear to our friends and neighbours. What I also think we need to do as a movement, and this may be more controversial, is we need a socialist critique of the European Union. I really do think we do, because what's happened is, in the political mainstream, the only people criticising the European Union are free marketeers and nationalists. People have got to remember that in the 1970s, it was a socialist critique of the European Union that was predominant. So we need to think about lots of things which some people in our movement may find uncomfortable to think about. We need to think about, does the European Union, as it stands, work in the favour of the interests of working class people? I think we know there are plenty of judgments against collective agreements and against the interests of trade unions that prove that it's not currently working fundamentally in the favour of working class people. You know, it's an anti-democratic capitalist institution, and we need a socialist critique of it. I do think we need to talk about, does the free movement of labour, in whose interest does the free movement of labour in the European Union work? My argument is this: the free movement of labour doesn't fundamentally work in the interests of workers who happen to be from Britain. The free movement of labour doesn't work fundamentally in the interests of workers who happen to be from Eastern Europe. The free movement of labour, as it stands, works fundamentally in the interests of big business, and that's why they support it. So we should be saying that if the free movement of labour exists, if it's going to exist, then a law should be passed saying that every worker, regardless of national origin, is entitled to the same pay, terms and conditions as the workers in the country of destination. And then unscrupulous bosses can't use the free movement of labour to undercut terms and conditions. So there are plenty of things to get our teeth around. And I can understand why people feel let down by Labour. I feel let down by the voters as well, actually, because if the opinion polls had been true, we'd have had a Labour government that we could put pressure on to deliver more for our people. But if in this leadership election Labour takes the decision to travel back in time to Blairism, if Labour takes that decision, then I think electoral oblivion lies in our path. Make no mistake, Labour was smashed in Scotland, but why was it smashed? Well, firstly, the Labour Party the Labour leadership handled the independence referendum in Scotland incredibly badly. It was absolutely ridiculous to share a platform with Nick Clegg, and it was absolutely even more disgraceful to share a platform with David Cameron. There were socialist and progressive arguments for an independence vote, but there were also socialist and progressive arguments for a no vote as well. I take the view that the real division in our society isn't based upon geography. The real division in our society is based upon economic class. I believe that a bus driver or a baker in Glasgow has more in common with a bus driver or baker in Newcastle than either of them do with the Scottish multimillionaire like Brian Souter, who owns Stagecoach and who funded the SNP. And that's the socialist argument we should have been making. What Labour shouldn't have been doing is lining up with members of the political establishment and the big business elite to make an establishment case for a no vote. That guaranteed a poorer result for the no vote than should have been the case, and it also didn't help in the general election that came shortly after. But I'm not a person that believes that Labour's destruction in Scotland on May the 7th was due alone to mishandling the independence referendum. I believe that the conditions for Labour's catastrophe were sown more than 20 years ago when Tony Blair became leader of the Labour Party in 1994. Because, and we all know it from our own areas as well, the view of the Blairites, the views of the new Labourites was this: well, you can take people in East Leeds for granted, with nowhere else to go. You can take people in Scotland for granted, nowhere else to go. You can take people for granted in the North East or in the middle of London because they've got nowhere else to go. Well, the truth is they have got somewhere else to go. The somewhere else they have to go is either by not voting, by voting UKIP, or in Scotland by voting for the SNP. And I think it's a disgrace when you take your most loyal supporters for granted. Some people were criticising me for campaigning so hard in a seat that's never been held by anybody else other than Labour. But I make no apologies for that. Make no apologies for it whatsoever. Firstly, in life and in politics, nothing is guaranteed. But secondly, I want to show respect to the people in East Leeds and across the country who've stayed loyal to Labour through thick and thin. I want to show respect to people who voted with their consciences, general election after general election, and didn't vote on the off chance of making a quick buck themselves at the expense of their neighbours. One last thing, I think, before I finish. In this leadership election, people are saying, as I mentioned earlier, oh, Labour lost because we were too left-wing. Obviously, that's total nonsense from our political perspective. But even logically, forgetting our politics, it's nonsense. When I was knocking on doors, and I knocked on plenty of them, in my own constituency and in marginal constituencies that sadly we lost, the reason people were giving for not voting Labour wasn't, oh, you're too extreme, you're too left-wing, you're like communists almost, foaming at the mouth, swivel-eyed revolutionaries. They weren't saying that to us. The thing that I heard time and time again when people were explaining why they didn't want to vote Labour was because, in their words, you're all the same. Yeah? Now, I don't believe it's true that we're all the same. I believe that's about the media sowing cynicism which stops Labour people voting Labour. But the perception with too many people was that we're all the same. And so those people in the Labour Party who think the solution to an election defeat, which occurred because too many people think we're all the same, to those who think the solution to that is to be even more similar to the Tories, I say you're in cloud cuckoo land and you're going to take us down a path of electoral disaster. The Blairites have no monopoly on electoral success. 5 million votes were lost under New Labour. 4 million of those were lost under Tony Blair. I believe that people want politics and people want politicians who say what they think. I don't believe that people expect to agree with everything that their MP or party leader says, but I do think people expect us to talk straight and say what we think. One of the many reasons that politicians are held in such low regard is because they're trying to please everybody all the time. As Nia Bevan said, if you try and walk down the middle of the road, you get run down by both sides. So thank you for your patience with my lengthy address. Next time I come back, I want to see some Leeds United shirts in the audience. But also, I'm looking forward to not only seeing you fight against this government, I'm looking forward to fighting alongside you against the government, because the truth is this: if we don't win these battles, if we don't win the battle to save our NHS, if we don't win the battle to keep our trade unions as organisations that can fight back against the bosses and against the government, then not only will history not forgive us, what's more, we won't deserve to be forgiven. Onwards to the fight, comrades, onwards to victory.
Told you, Popper MP.
Right, Richard, inspiring speech, fantastic, and I would echo everything Ian said about, a trade union member of this trade union giving an address like that is fantastic. We've got a few gifts though. You'll be busy.
Thanks very much.
Doing all the things in the House of Commons, all the gifts that you get on your tour. First of all, we've got one of our limited edition Bakers Union T-shirts for when you're out on the marches, the People's Assembly.
Wonderful, thanks very much.
I would actually like to see you wearing the House of Commons, but I believe the Speaker would name you for being improperly dressed. We've also got you a waterproof jacket, which probably would come in handy with all the crocodile tears you're going to get across the benches. One of our benches for there. We've also got, which is actually probably one of the biggest gifts. It's a limited edition pewter baker. I'm not going to unpack it because it's got loads of stuff around it, but they're very, very good. Lots and lots of packaging around it. It explains the history of our union, where we came from cellar baking. It's in there. We hope it takes pride of place somewhere, either in your office or your home, and it reminds you of the day that you spent with the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union fellow members. And the last one, but you did say that you enjoyed the nights when you used to go to Fox's Biscuits. So rather than you go over there tonight on the way home, Helena incidentally is at the back somewhere, and so's Ian Wood somewhere, both here. Fox's Biscuits, made by trade union members.
Thank you.
I believe it's the most valuable gift that you'll get, and don't need to tell anyone.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much, and thanks for your hospitality. I enjoy biscuits so much that next time I come back, the T-shirt they'll have to give me won't be an XL. The T-shirt they'll have to give me will be an FB. Work out for yourself. Work out for yourself what that stands for. Friend of the Bakers. Last night, by the way, on the subject of gifts, last night I was up late finishing the register of MPs' interests. It had to be handed in by midnight last night. So the MPs who have second jobs can talk about the second jobs. So the MPs who have shares can talk about the shares they've got. So MPs who are directors of companies can talk about that. But I was pleased that to paraphrase Oscar Wilde said, the customs, didn't he? I have nothing to declare apart from my genius. I can't quite say that, but I have to say that on my declaration form last night, I had nothing to declare apart from the support I'm proud to get from the trade unions. Thank you very much.
Here, what are you doing now? Are you going to carry on with the agenda? Are you going to go to
Okay, conference, brew time. 22.